Okay, everybody. Good morning. Excuse my late start this morning, despite my efforts. Okay, so page 888, as we continue with our discussion of this transition in Moshe Rabbeinu's life. We mentioned last week Hashem's promise to Moshe, V'ra'isa osa, you'll see the land, V'ne'esafta el amecha, and you'll be gathered to your people, Gam ata, you as well, Ka'asher ne'esaf Aharon achicha, as your brother Aharon was also gathered, meaning as Aharon was also gathered without the pain of death, Misa bin Neshika. That's the same idea. Okay, let me just see how I do this here. Just trying to turn off this stupid chime. Okay, there we go. All right, good. All right, so this morning we're going to look at the next pasuk Tes Vav, Ka'asher, pasuk 15, Ka'asher merisem pi b'midbar tzin b'merivas ha'eda lahakdisheni b'mayim le'enehem heim mei meriva kadesh midbar tzin. Very unusual, somewhat complicated pasuk. The meaning of it is.
What book are we on? Sorry.
We are Perek Chav Zayin.
Yes, 15.
Pasuk Tes Vav.
Zion is not 15.
800 and
Number 14, I think, no?
Yudalid, maybe?
Yeah, Hashem Rishon is Yudalid.
Maybe it's Yudalid. We're on the right page, so 888, right?
Yes.
Okay, 888. It looks like it is Yudalid, indeed, right? Yudalid. Okay, 888, Yudalid. What does the pasuk say? Ka'asher merisem pi. Okay, the simple meaning of the pasuk is clear. In other words, the simple meaning of the pasuk is, Moshe, you are going to die. That's what I just told you. You're going to die like your brother Aharon. And the reason you're going to die is because of what you failed to do at Mei Meriva, what you failed to do at Mei Meriva, which was in Kadesh in Midbar Tzin. What did Moshe Rabbeinu fail to do? This is the pshat. What did he fail to do? He failed to listen to Hashem. Hashem said, speak to the rock. Moshe Rabbeinu struck the rock. And as a result of that, he failed to listen to Hashem. And he was punished. And this is his punishment. His punishment is that he's going to die. That's simple. That's a simple understanding of the pasuk. But obviously, there's a lot more detail into our understanding of exactly what's going on here. What was this transgression? Why is it couched in the terms of sanctifying me? What is this all about? And I think we'll see some interesting approaches to it this morning. Okay. So first of all, we're going to start with the very beginning of the pasuk. The word ka'asher. How do you translate ka'asher? When? That's how I would normally translate ka'asher, as when. However, it doesn't work here, right? How do you translate ka'asher here? What's the English say? Because. Because. Mipnei. Right? Or biglal. Mipnei, biglal, because. That's the understanding. That's what the pasuk says here. Because you didn't sanctify me, because you didn't listen to me, because you didn't sanctify me at Mei Meriva, that's why you're going to die. That's the because. That's the ka'asher. Interesting, look at the pasuk right before it that we just learned last week. V'ra'isa osa, you'll see the land, v'ne'esafta el amecha, and you'll be gathered to your people. Gam ata, you as well, ka'asher ne'esaf Aharon achicha. Does the translation when work there either?
No.
No. What does the ka'asher mean there?
Just as.
Just as. The ka'asher means just as. Right? So similarly here, it would seem to be a just as. Right? Ka'asher, just as. Does it work here? Just as merisem, that you rebelled against me at Midbar Tzin. It doesn't work here either. So clearly, the Meforshim struggle with what the meaning of ka'asher is. Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch says that ka'asher generally doesn't mean because. It usually means, says Rav Hirsch, a similarity, just as we use it in the previous pasuk. So what is the just as here? That just as Aharon died because of the sin of not sanctifying me at Mei Merivah in the desert, so too you, Moshe Rabbeinu, are going to die for the transgression of not sanctifying me. So the English translates it as because. Why? Makes a lot of sense. Makes the pasuk flow more smoothly. Because. But the way Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch looks at it is HaKadosh Baruch Hu is sending another message. And the message that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is sending to Moshe is Aharon died as a result of the sin, and you're going to die as a result of the sin. The same sin, same transgression, because you refused to listen to me. Why did Moshe refuse to listen to Hashem? I mean, there was no question as to what Hashem told Moshe to do. Kadosh Baruch Hu said clearly to Moshe, speak to the rock. There's no question about that. Why would Moshe not listen?
Time before, Hashem had said, strike the rock.
Okay, so Sonia is speaking in Moshe Rabbeinu's defense. Thank you, Sonia. Right? And Sonia is saying, last time God said, strike the rock. Where was that, by the way? Anybody remember? Where did that occur? After Refidim. Right? After the waters of Refidim, they crossed through the Yam Suf. They traveled to a place called Refidim. The waters of Refidim were bitter. What happened? God said to Moshe, take a piece of wood, throw it into the water, throw the tree into the water, and what's going to happen? The waters are going to turn sweet. So Bnei Yisrael had something to drink, and following that, Hashem said to Moshe, hit the rock and there'll be water, okay? So Sonia's saying, Moshe, 40 years ago, God told Moshe, hit the rock. And now Sonia is saying, when God told Moshe to speak to the rock, Moshe was thinking back to what he did the last time and perhaps just made that mistake. Is that what you're suggesting, Sonia?
Yes.
Okay, so certainly a possibility, right? Certainly one way of understanding it. But I think it's a little bit, I think we can give Moshe a little bit more credit. Or it's not that Moshe didn't understand the Kadosh Baruch Hu. It's not that Moshe said, you know what? Last time he told me to hit the rock, and this time he's telling me to speak to the rock. Maybe I should hit the rock. No, I don't think that's it.
Rabbi, I don't think Moshe at that time was sitting and working all that out intellectually. I mean, he had to do something fast. And that's how he more or less did it before without thinking, you know.
Okay, so Sonia went from defending Moshe to now putting him on trial for responding, without really thinking, right? Moshe Rabbeinu was being pressured by the people. Od ma'at uskuluni, right? A little bit more and they're going to kill me. I need to do something. Maybe he tried to talk to the rock and it didn't work. And Moshe Rabbeinu, out of desperation, did what? Hit the rock. Okay, I think that's what Sonia is trying to say, right? Out of desperation, Moshe Rabbeinu hit the rock, and that's what happened. That's okay. Anybody have any other thoughts as to why Moshe Rabbeinu didn't listen to Hashem? I mean, clearly Moshe Rabbeinu understood what Hashem wanted from him. We have no other instance where Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu to do something, and Moshe Rabbeinu says, "I'm not really sure I understand what you're saying."
Are you including in desperation, frustration, anger, impatience?
Could be all of those things, right? Could be all of those things, right? On the other hand, we know that Moshe Rabbeinu was somebody who was able to lead Bnei Yisrael through the Midbar all of these years. And since he was able to lead Bnei Yisrael through the Midbar all of these years, and he dealt with much frustration, but at no time as a result of his frustration did he disobey Hashem. Right? He fell on his face. I mean, think about it all the times. Bnei Yisrael complained by Mara. Bnei Yisrael complained about the man. Bnei Yisrael complained about the Slav. Bnei Yisrael complained about nearly everything that Bnei Yisrael could complain about. And every time Moshe Rabbeinu took the complaint, went to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, responded to the people. Even with Korach, when Moshe Rabbeinu's own authority was being challenged, what's the worst that Moshe Rabbeinu does? He doesn't disobey Hashem. What's the most that Moshe Rabbeinu does? He falls on his face in tefillah and prayer before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He asks HaKadosh Baruch Hu to come up with something special here, something unique, something we'll remember. Okay, something they'll remember. So all of a sudden, Moshe Rabbeinu, because he's so frustrated, disobeys Hashem. So there's there's a famous story about Rabbi Levi of Berdichev. Rabbi Levi of Berdichev was known as the staunch defender of the Jewish people. And the story is told that was one Yom Tov day, and outside of the shul, one of the Jews was smoking a cigarette. Maybe it was a Shabbos day, and Yom Tov day. Yom Tov people still smoked, right? Shabbos they didn't smoke. Maybe it was a Shabbos, maybe it was Yom Kippur, I'm not sure. And Rabbi Levi of Berdichev turned to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and said, Kadosh Baruch Hu, I know that there's this Jew here who is smoking a cigarette, and probably you're upset with him. But you know what? He has a lot to be upset with you about also. And he went through a whole litany of things that was affecting this guy in his life. He says, you know what? If you forgive him, I'm sure he'll forgive you. Right? Rab Levi of Berdichev was always trying to defend Bnei Israel, always working. He always saw his job as to intercede with HaKadosh Baruch Hu on behalf of Bnei Israel. That, according to some, is how Moshe Rabbeinu is dealing with this now. When Hashem said Moshe Rabbeinu to speak to the rock and sanctify me in front of all of the people, what was Hashem actually saying to Moshe Rabbeinu? Moshe Rabbeinu, you speak to the rock and the rock will bring forth water. And therefore what? And therefore what?
We'll see how wonderful Hashem is, because
right? And Bnei Israel will see how wonderful Hashem is, because Moshe Rabbeinu, all you had to do is speak to the rock and the rock will bring forth water. But there was a deeper message here that Hashem was conveying to Moshe Rabbeinu. And it wasn't just simply about sanctifying Hashem. It was as well about creating a challenge for Bnei Israel. What was the sanctification that Bnei Israel were supposed to get from this? Anybody remember the Rashi that we learned? What was the sanctification? So when Bnei Israel see that a rock that is an inanimate object listens to Hashem, so then what is Bnei Israel going to deduce? If a rock that's an inanimate object that has no neshama, no connection to God, listens to Hashem, so kal v'chomer, how much more so should we be listening to Hashem? And what were Bnei Israel not doing? They were not listening to Hashem. So when if Moshe had indeed done what he was supposed to do, if Moshe had spoken to the rock and water would have come out of the rock, then that would have been a patch to whom? To Bnei Israel. It would have been a patch to Bnei Israel. Because Bnei Israel, look, right, it's like through Moshe Rabbeinu's actions, Bnei Israel are going to get this message that they are falling short. If the rock listens to Hashem, how come you don't listen to Hashem? So Moshe Rabbeinu tried to avoid patching Bnei Israel.
oh,
Right? Moshe Rabbeinu tried to avoid patching Bnei Israel. Anybody have any other incidents that they know of where there was a similar kind of theme? I'll give you a hint. Yom Kippur afternoon. What do we read on Yom Kippur afternoon? Sefer Yonah, the book of Jonah, right? You know, the Yonah and the whale. Although we don't know that it was a whale, it was probably a large fish, whatever it was, right? So maybe a whale, we don't know. So what's the story with Yonah? Why is Yonah in trouble? Yonah's a Navi. Hashem says to Yonah, go to Nineveh. What was Nineveh? It was the Assyrian capital. We're not talking Jews, right? Go to Nineveh, go to this people, this foreign people, go to Nineveh, and in Nineveh, tell them that they're going to be punished by Hashem because they're not acting properly. And what does Yonah do? Runs away. He runs away. Jumps on a boat, right, heading in a direction anywhere but Nineveh. I'll take the boat that's going anywhere other than Nineveh. Gets on the boat, and why does Yonah run away? What's so bad about going to Nineveh and telling the people of Nineveh, hey, you're gonna die?
He's afraid.
Okay, so on the one level, you could say that he's afraid for himself. That Yonah is afraid for himself. I'm gonna go show up in Tehran and climb up on a soapbox in Tehran and start preaching to them that they're gonna get killed. What's gonna happen? I'm gonna get killed, right? But the Meforshim don't suggest that at all. Betty, go ahead.
He's afraid that they're going to listen to him and become virtuous, and the Jewish people are not.
Correct. Right? How do the Meforshim understand Yonah's reticence? They say Yonah was concerned that indeed, not that they would harm him, but that they would listen to him and they would do tshuva, which, by the way, is why we read this on Yom Kippur. It's about people doing tshuva, about Nineveh doing tshuva, about Yonah doing tshuva, right? So Yonah was afraid that they were going to listen to him and they were going to do tshuva, and what would happen as a result of that? What would Yonah be doing? He'd be saving them, but he'd be patching Bnei Yisrael. Why? Because Hashem would say, the Goyim, Dorton, they listen to me. But you, my kindlech, you Bnei Yisrael, you don't listen to me. So Yonah's reticence to do this was due to the fact that through him was going to come this patch to Bnei Yisrael. Right? So as a result of that, he tried to run away. Ultimately, it's hard to run away from Hashem. But that's what he tried to do. Again, a similar kind of example, which is just like Moshe didn't want this to come as a patch to Bnei Israel, so too Yonah didn't want what his actions were going to do to bring about a patch to Bnei Israel. Is that an Aveira? Is that something to lose your chelek in Eretz Yisrael for? We would seem to argue not, right? I mean, we're going to jump on Sonia's bandwagon of defending Moshe Rabbeinu. So what Moshe Rabbeinu did was seemingly in the best interest of Bnei Yisrael. So if that was the case, why is he being punished like this?
I think if you understand the role of the Navi all the way through all the Nevi'im also, that's the role, is to patch. So.
Right, so you're saying, so what Sue is suggesting is that the role of the Navi is to patch. And Moshe was demonstrating here that he wasn't able to do that. He wasn't able to patch. And as a result of that, Hashem said, okay, time to get a new Navi in. Right? Time to get somebody new to lead the people. I think that's what you're suggesting. Go ahead, Betty.
I think Bnei Yisrael entering Israel was a different time, and the leaders of before, are not going to lead them or help them grow.
Okay. So here is a very powerful thought. A very powerful thought that is suggested by Rav Hirsch as well, along the lines that Betty mentioned, that Moshe's transgression here, although his intention was to not patch Bnei Israel, turned out to harm Bnei Israel more. Why? So listen to what Rav Hirsch writes. He says, we have two instances of Moshe, rock, and water. The first is earlier, the Mei Meriva of Refidim, where Moshe hits the rock. And the second is the Mei Meriva of Midbar Tzin in Kadesh, where Moshe is supposed to speak to the rock and doesn't speak to the rock. So listen to what Rav Hirsch says. He says, B'tchilas ha'ma'aseh b'midbar. When Bnei Israel were just getting started on this journey in the Midbar, Nitztava Moshe lahotzi mayim min hasela al yedei ha'ka'a b'mata Hashem. Moshe Rabbeinu was commanded to bring water from the rock by striking it with the mata, with the staff that represented the miraculous intervention of Hashem. Mayim elu hayu habitachon shelahem bechol tukufas shehusam bamidbar. That what? The water coming from the rock, having been struck by the mata, was a sign of bitachon, a sign of Bnei Yisrael being able to believe in Hashem as they traveled through the Midbar, that what was going to happen, that they were constantly going to be taken care of by Nisim, that there would be open and revealed miracles like hitting a rock and bringing water out from a rock through a staff that brought about the miraculous Yitzias Mitzrayim. This would stay with them throughout the Midbar. Heim hochichu, these waters proved la'am to the people, shehem yecholim litzapos lehis arvus yishera shel koach Hashem hanisi. That what? That Bnei Yisrael would be able to anticipate and rely on Hashem's miraculous intervention throughout their journey in the Midbar. And whenever they doubted something, all they had to do was look at the water coming from the rock. And they saw the water coming from the rock, this miraculous intervention through Moshe by hitting the rock using using the staff, right? And that's what gave them assurances through the desert. Okay? However, B'Kadesh b'Midbar Tzin, now they're in Kadesh, they're in Midbar Tzin. This is the end of their journey. They are about to come into the land of Israel. They're about to transition. B'Ktzei HaMidbar, they're at the end of their journey in the Midbar, and they are the Utchilas Haaretz Hanoshaves. And they're right at the beginning of settling, right there at this transition point between leaving the Midbar and settling into the land. What does Rav Hirsch say? Listen to this. Hishtaneh derech hanhagas Hashem. The way in which Hashem is going to deal with Bnei Yisrael is changing. No longer is there going to be this open, miraculous intervention of Hashem in the lives of Bnei Yisrael. Water is no longer flowing from the rock. Man is no longer falling from the Shamayim. If you want water, what do you have to do? Dig a well. If you want to eat, what do you have to do? Plant grain and harvest the grain and make food from that. Right? The intervention of Hashem in the life of Bnei Yisrael is now different. It's changed. And as a result of that, hang on just a second, as a result of that, the message has to change. And listen to what Rav Hirsch writes. He says, Etzem ihaka hasela, this act of not striking the rock, which would demonstrate hatzlachas hadibur litzad mata Hashem. In other words, we've set up this staff versus speaking to Hashem. So on the one hand, I have hitting the rock with the staff. That's one scenario. And on the other hand, I have speaking to the rock using the koach hadibur. Which was the intended message that Hashem wanted Bnei Yisrael to get as they made this transition into Eretz Yisrael? That what's going to now be effective?
Speaking.
Dibur, speaking, or in another word, tefillah, davening. Right? We're not going to be able to bring about these open miracles anymore. But we still are going to retain that connection to Hashem through our dibur, through our speech, through our prayer. And that was Moshe Rabbeinu's mission at this point, was to teach Bnei Yisrael that they needed to transition from expecting manna falling from the Shamayim to working on grain growing from the ground. That they needed to transition from expecting Hashem to save them miraculously to praying for Hashem to give them the strength that they need to do what has to be done. Raylene.
But they also lost God's voice. He no longer spoke directly to anyone else after Moshe dies. So they lost a key component in their ability to sustain the faith.
But we have Nevi'im. We have Nevi'im post Moshe.
But
Right.
the difference is the closeness of the people to a leader. Now it's just the tribes traveling through the land, trying to get to Israel, and God speaks to Moshe
But-
directly, and
I'll repeat it.
and then Moshe speaks to the people. After this, they look for signs, they look for signals, they look for different
Right,
kinds of
they've
things.
lost
They've lost that direct
They've-
ability.
Correct, they have.
And that's
that's
a big
part.
loss.
It is a big loss, but that's, according to Rav Hirsch, this is part of the transition. In other words, this closeness, hold on a second, I'll ask Hashem, was necessary during the time when they were in the Midbar, because that was the time when they were receiving the Torah and ironing out all of the wrinkles, so to speak, and developing as a people. But now they're coming into the land, they're not going to have that, wait a minute, I'll ask Hashem. The closest they have now to wait a minute, I'll ask Hashem is, anybody know? The Urim V'Tumim, the Choshen Mishpat that the Kohen Gadol wore, the Urim V'Tumim, which was inside that, the Kohen Gadol being able to ask Hashem. And even when the Kohen Gadol asked Hashem, it wasn't like the Kohen Gadol heard clearly what Hashem's answer was. What did the Kohen Gadol have to do? He had to interpret the answer from Hashem. We lost that direct connection to Hashem. And that, says Rav Hirsch, is part of Hashem's plan.
So if it was part of Hashem's plan, maybe it wasn't a punishment that Moshe had to die at this point. In other words, that contrived idea that he was punished for this one transgression may not even be a fact. It may be man's need to understand why he died.
So I think that Rav Hirsch would suggest that Moshe Rabbeinu dies because he's not capable of making this, he wasn't capable of making the transition himself, and he's not capable of communicating the transition to Bnei Yisrael. Now,
And if you took him later, you have Yoshua on the bend.
Right.
So, he's preparing everyone for that.
Right.
But they saw Yitzchak doing wells. They could have known, I can do this. But, they were used to Midbar.
but they were used. Look, they were used to Mitzrayim. This was a people of very little faith, so they needed to have this faith in the Midbar, and this faith was reinforced by open miracles. I think any one of us, right, if we experience open miracles, and maybe all of us have in one way or another, experience these open, right, miracles in our lives. So what do we say? Reinforces our faith. It's like the guy who's, the guy who keeps buying who keeps wanting to win the lottery but never buys the lottery ticket. Hashem says, buy the lottery ticket. So go ahead.
But these people saw these miracles and then 2 minutes later sinned and rebelled with the golden calf, and
Yeah, right, correct.
it didn't last.
No, 100%. Right? But again, it wasn't all of Klal Yisrael that rebelled. Remember, the Jewish people didn't get completely wiped out in the Midbar. The people who didn't have the faith, the belief that they would be able to go into Eretz Yisrael and conquer Eretz Yisrael, the men died in the Midbar. But all the women went into Eretz Yisrael, all the Leviim went into Eretz Yisrael, all the people who were below the age of 20 went into Eretz Yisrael. Now, yes, Einachinami, it's true, there were people who died along the way. Right? There were always rebellions along the way. There's actually one opinion that said all of these rebellions came from the Erev Rav, right? The ones who were, in the back of the line, right? The ones who were outside. The Erev Rav, they were the ones, and all of this was to rid Bnei Yisrael of the Erev Rav. So yes, but, there are some very challenging interpretations for Bnei Yisrael's interactions with Hashem. But that's what we're saying. This is what Rav Hirsch is saying here. Rav Hirsch is saying that even though we might look at this and we might say, oh, you know what? Moshe Rabbeinu is a tzaddik. Why? Because Moshe Rabbeinu was doing this to protect Bnei Yisrael. What do we see instead? We see that that's not the case. We see that that's not the case, that Moshe Rabbeinu failed to do what he needed to do as a leader to move Bnei Yisrael in the next direction. He failed as the leader to do that. And as a result of his failure, he doesn't come into Eretz Yisrael. So whether you want to say that's a punishment or a consequence, I'm not sure. Right? Is it a punishment or a consequence? Either way, but go ahead.
There's another question. If Moshe was no longer able to be in the role of leader, could he have stepped down and stayed alive and have someone else take that role?
It seems not.
Did he have to die?
Right? It seems not. It seems not. There's this beautiful medrash. I don't know if you've ever heard this medrash. There's a beautiful medrash that Moshe Rabbeinu pleads with HaKadosh Baruch Hu to do exactly that which Beverly suggests. Right? That Moshe Rabbeinu says, listen, I just want to be a balabas. And I just want to come to shul. I'll sit in the back. I'll talk. I'll be like everybody else. Right? I don't need to sit in the front. I don't need to give the drasha. I just want to be a balabas. So Hashem says, okay. And what does Hashem do? Anybody remember the medrash? Hashem takes him and puts him in Rabbi Akiva's class, transports him to the future and puts him in Rabbi Akiva's class. And what is Rabbi Akiva doing? Rabbi Akiva is teaching Torah, and he's talking about all these things that Moshe Rabbeinu has no idea about, right? No idea about. And when the students in the class ask him and say, what's the source for this? What does he reply? Halacha Moshe Sinai. Right? He says it's a law that was given to Moshe at Sinai. And according to the Medrash, Moshe Rabbeinu just simply wasn't able to bear it. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't able to move out of the limelight. Right? Now, it's not an ego thing with Moshe Rabbeinu. It's not like Moshe Rabbeinu needed the ego boost of being Moshe Rabbeinu. Right? But Moshe Rabbeinu didn't want to be in a situation where he would ever be jealous of someone else. So Moshe Rabbeinu said to Hashem, I can't do it. So Beverly, maybe you're right, but Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't handle it. Rosie.
What comes to mind? 6 or 7 shuls, lahavdil, you don't want them to go away permanently, but you got the rabbis sitting, the emerituses sitting in the back, and you feel they're like, they want to say, they want to talk, they want to interject. We could think of 5 shuls in that case. They never go away.
It's very challenging, right? It's very, very challenging. It's very challenging. It's very challenging for somebody who's always been in a kind of leadership role to suddenly take a back seat. It's part of the challenge. Yes. So Moshe Rabbeinu was actually not able to do that, at least according to the way Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch understands this. So even though maybe he had good intentions by not speaking to the rock in order to save a patra b'nei Yisrael, it was not what Hashem wanted from him. And as a result of that, Moshe Rabbeinu failed. Right? And Moshe Rabbeinu's failure was punished, or the consequence of Moshe Rabbeinu's failure was that he was not going to lead Bnei Yisrael into Eretz Yisrael. Okay. So, very, very interesting. We mentioned the Rashi, I think at the end of last week, we mentioned the Rashi, where Rashi says every time that the death of Moshe is mentioned, that we mentioned the reason why. Right? I think that was the Rashi that we learned. Let's look.
That he shouldn't be implicated in the other.
Right, correct. Okay. So if you look in the Rashi, this is very interesting. If you look in the Rashi, on the right column, about a little bit more than a third, nearly halfway down, you see the bold print, Ka'asher ne'asaf aharon achicha in Yud Gimel. And Rashi gives 2 different reasons there. Mikan shenis'ave Moshe lemisaso shel Aaron, davar acher ein ata tov mimenu. Okay. Then Rashi says, Al asher lo kidashtem. Al asher lo kidashtem. It's interesting. The Ralbag says this is a misprint in Rashi. Because why in the middle of Rashi is he quoting Al Asher Lo Kidashtem, which is not from our pasuk here? Where is that from? It's not from our pasuk. It's not from what we're talking about. It's from Chumash Devarim, right? Where we read HaKadosh Baruch Hu's final directive to Moshe. So the Ralbag says this was a printer's mistake, that the printer put the wrong pasuk in here. Printer misquoted Rashi, right, and put the wrong pasuk here. Rashi means to comment on our pasuk of Ka'asher Merisem Pi B'midbar Tzin B'merivas Ha'eda Lahakdisheni B'mayim. That's what he means to comment on. Saying what? Ha im kidashtem osi, if you would have sanctified me, so adayin lo higia zmanachem lipater min ha'olam. What would have happened? You would have, your time to die would not have arrived. If you had sanctified me, you might have been able to lead this people into Eretz Yisrael. B'chol makom, says Rashi, everywhere shekasav misasam, where the death of Moshe and Aaron is mentioned, kasav surchanam, the reason for their death is mentioned as well, in order that we shouldn't make the mistake, right? Lefisha nigzera gezera al dor hamidbar, lamus b'midbar ba'avon shelo ha'aminu. The generation of the Midbar died in the sin of lack of faith in Hashem. Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to make sure that no one would ever say the reason he died was because he didn't have faith in Hashem. Lekach, therefore, says Rashi, Bikesh Moshe sheyikasev surchano, shelo yomru afhu min hamamrim haya. Moshe Rabbeinu wanted what? Moshe Rabbeinu wanted Hashem to write down the reason why he was being punished, so that no one would ever say Moshe Rabbeinu was punished. Why? Because he also had a lack of faith like everyone else. Moshe Rabbeinu was punished on his own right for something that Moshe Rabbeinu did. And then Rashi brings the mashal. This is all from the Medrash, from the Sifri. Rashi brings the mashal. Mashal l'shtei noshim shelokos bebezdin. This is the metaphor, the analogy is to two women who are being punished by Bezdin. They're getting malkos, right? They're being publicly flogged by Bezdin. Achas kilkala, one of them did what? One of them strayed sexually. V'achas achla page shvius. And one of them did what? And one of them ate produce from the sabbatical year. Okay? Both transgressions, right? Both transgressions are punishable by makos. Both transgressions are punishable by flogging. We're not talking about a woman who committed adultery, because adultery is punishable by death. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a woman who committed another level, right, less severe sexual transgression. Okay? They're both punished by flogging. But what? The woman who is getting punished for eating the produce from Shemitah, what did she say? She said, please put up a sign, right, that I'm not getting punished for the same reason she's getting punished. Everybody knows why she's getting punished. I don't want to be right. I don't want people to think I'm getting punished for the same reason. So what does the Sifri say? Rashi continues. And Rashi actually doesn't mention the Sifri, but the Shifri says that they took one of these things that she ate and hung it around her neck, so that people would see. So that would be a sign that people would see why she was being punished. And so too, Moshe Rabbeinu wanted, whenever his name was mentioned, whenever his death was mentioned, Moshe Rabbeinu wanted the people to understand that he was dying not as a result of the same transgression that everybody else was dying from, but as a result of something different. So this was, go ahead, Kedva.
I just want to say that I'm very pleased I didn't live at that time. The punishments are out of proportion. So that woman ate some produce that she should have waited an extra year or whatever. To have a public flogging for that, I'm pleased I live now. So that's just it.
I agree with you. I'm also glad I live now, right?
There's more
Right.
interesting is that this is the mashal that Chazal brings. I mean, let's say I would imagine that more men get flogged than women in general, but the mashal they bring is this. So maybe they're trying to point that here's like the most innocence. I don't know. It's just a weird mashal.
It is a little bit. Remember, it's brought down by the Sifri, which is the Medrash. Rashi just quotes it.
When
Right.
was that written?
The Sifri, the Medrash, was written at approximately the time of the Talmud. That's when it was, right? Rashi brings it. Rashi's like 500 years later, 600 years, 700 years later. So Rashi is bringing that Medrash.
Right, all the mitzvot are on the same level. That's their
What?
It should that all the mitzvot are on the same level of fulfillment. That's what I think.
So I mean, Chedva's interestingly commenting on, what seems to us in the year 2022 as inappropriate societal punishment, right? Flogging, stoning, all of these things, right? All of these things. But I think it's important for us to remember, all of this was a projection of halachic independence in a society where halacha was the law, right? Halacha was the law, and if you violated the law, what happened? You needed to be punished. Some punishments were more severe, some punishments were less severe. I'm sure, as Sue mentioned, that men got flogged much more than women got flogged, right? And Beis Din, it's a whole interesting discussion of what good is a religion, right? What good is following the law if the only reason you're following the law is because you're forced to follow the law? Because if you don't follow the law, what's going to happen? You're going to get punished, right? So what good is such a society? And why do we want to have such a society like that? So think about raising your own children, right? Raising your own children. It's important when children are first being raised that as parents, we need to teach them that there are consequences to behavior, that there's a right way to do, there's a right way to do something and there's a wrong way to do something. When you do something the right way, there are good consequences, and when you do something the wrong way, there are bad consequences to behavior. Now, we need to be able to teach that. We hope that our children are going to grow up where they're able to make these decisions not based on consequences anymore. Not based on consequences, right? We hope that they're going to grow up to be able to make these decisions because they've internalized the values. But let me ask a question. How many people do you think pay their taxes because of altruistic values of supporting society, as opposed to out of fear that if they get audited, they're really going to be in Gehakta Tzaras?
Zero.
Right. I mean, it's the nature of society. It's the nature of society that without consequences of behavior doesn't maintain a certain standard. Right? Now, again, I think we're not talking about morality, right? So I don't consider speeding an issue of morality. But what stops people from speeding? A ticket. That's what stops people from speeding, right? What stops them from speeding is a ticket. Now, what should stop them from speeding is hurting someone, hurting yourself, hurting someone else, breaking the law. Society is going to break down if people wantonly break the law. That's what should motivate you to stop speeding. And I think by and large, many people don't speed because exactly that reason. Because if everybody follows the law, so it's better for everybody, right? It's that same sense. But there are individuals who don't subscribe to that. And for them, it's necessary to have these consequences. So there were these consequences, Chedva. We can talk about, were the consequences appropriate for those times? Would they be appropriate today? What would happen today if Jewish law ran the show? right? What would happen today? Right? If we had a Bezdin, that we were not under anybody else's jurisdiction, we were under our own jurisdiction. Everything functioned according to halacha. What would happen? Right? Obviously, we're not ready for that because Hashem does not put us in that position. Right? And I can only begin to think of the challenges of, the Jewish community would shrink, right? Would shrink a lot. But even in the days of the Sanhedrin, when there was a death penalty, we know that at a particular point, what did the Sanhedrin do? They exiled themselves out of the Lishchas Agazis, which is where they needed to be to adjudicate capital cases. They exiled themselves. Why? Because of the spread, the abundance of cases that would have required execution. They said, we have to somehow adjust this. So I also share with you, I'm glad I'm not living in that time, or else I'd probably be pretty sore also.
So
Really.
human nature is one where we strive to be in charge of ourselves. I mean, we resist having things imposed on us. That's why we need laws, as you're saying. That's why we need oversight. But the fact remains that we are always at odds with that. Human nature hasn't changed from all these years. So is the Jewish law meant to come in conflict with man's nature? In other words, are we always supposed to be viewed as wanting to err? And we need these laws? Or is there a message that human nature could change? I mean, where are we going?
We have
going with this
good question. It's a good question. We have an ideal. And what is the ideal? The ideal is that I take the garbage out because my wife wants me to take the garbage out. That's the ideal. Okay? Why do I take the garbage out usually? Because I don't want the aggravation of not taking the garbage out. In other words, if I don't take the garbage out, what's going to happen? I'm gonna, how come you didn't? Wait, she's not at fault. I mean, rightfully so, right? Rightfully so. I don't take the garbage out, right? I'm gonna, so on a level, it's easier to take the garbage out. Why do I take the garbage out? Because I don't want the aggravation. Okay. Now that's a shortcoming in me, right? Why? And I occasionally aspire to a higher level. Why should I take the garbage out? I should take the garbage out because it's the right thing to do. The right thing to do is to take it's my job, my responsibility, right? It's my responsibility. It's on my list of things to do. It's my responsibility. It contributes to a functioning family. I should take the garbage out because of this, understanding that it's the right thing to do. There's a moral component to taking the garbage out.
We don't do it.
Sometimes we do it. In other words, we are supposed to aspire to it. Look, on one level, this is built into the very way in which we interact with Hashem. How many people observe Torah and mitzvos because they are scared about what will happen if they don't observe Torah and mitzvos, right? It's a fundamental motivating element. It's called yiras. It's not even yiras chet. It's not even fear of transgression. It's fear of punishment. It's fear of punishment, right? Yeah, I mean, there are many of us who go through life thinking that if we do the wrong thing, what is going to happen? Someone's going to get sick. Someone is going to get hurt. Something is going to go wrong. Someone's going to fail, all because I did the wrong thing. Now, is that the way ideally that we're supposed to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu? No. The ideal way of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not from fear, but from love. But sometimes we need to grow from that fear to love. Sometimes we don't grow, I think there are many of us, we don't grow, right? But there are many people who do grow also. So we're way off topic, but okay, go ahead.
I want to go back to the Sifri, which I think is really fascinating, because if you follow the analogy, then it's really a concern on Moshe's part about optics, and he's saying, I want the reason for my punishment out there whenever my death is mentioned, because I'm not similar to the Isha Shakilkala. I'm similar to the woman who ate from the sabbatical produce. So even though all the mitzvahs are supposed to be equal and it's not our business to weigh them, there is a scale here that's saying
100%.
my sin is not so great.
100%.
I'll accept my sin, I'll take the consequences, but I'm more like the produce eater than the harlot or whatever.
Correct. And I think that that's a given, right? The idea here, the given is that, we all make these value judgments, right? And Moshe Rabbeinu was making that value judgment as well. Moshe Rabbeinu was saying, listen, don't pin me as one of the people who didn't believe in Hashem. I did believe in Hashem, and I do believe in Hashem. And I failed in this particular incident, and that should be the reason why everybody knows why I'm not coming into Eretz Yisrael. You're right. You're absolutely right. But there's that value judgment. Okay, who was that?
One more quick thing. It's so interesting that in high school, the books that we read, Our Town, Sinclair Lewis, Scarlet Letter, it's all about the puritanical, ways, and not necessarily that all the kids related to themselves on Jewish topics, but those are all these, texts about morality and proper decisions. Now we have much more, besides 50 years ago, body of books, the Spanish heroines, what's her name wrote now, Esther Cross.
We lost her. Rosie, we lost you. I think
Okay.
Go ahead.
Nonfiction, yeah.
We didn't hear the name of the book. What was the name of the book? The one about
Oh.
Esther, you said?
By Albert's sister, Concealed, about her way of life, whatever, Morano type,
Right. No, I mean, clearly that's part of what's going on here is we're seeing this progression Moshe Rabbeinu is identifying as to, now what's Moshe Rabbeinu's next step? Now that he knows he's going to die, what's his next step?
He's gonna get with the program, and he's
Appoint
gonna.
a
No, he's not going to get with the program.
Appoint a successor.
Appoint a
No, he has to
successor.
prepare a leader.
Appoint a successor.
Isn't
In other
that
words,
what he's supposed
right?
to do?
No, so it's very interesting. Whose idea was it to have a successor? Hashem says, you're not going into the land. You're not leading the people. So what might we have expected Hashem to say? Okay, do me a favor. You're going to train this guy, and this guy's going to take over. But we don't find that. What do we find next? The next pasuk is Moshe Rabbeinu reaching out to Hashem. Right? The next pasuk tells us, Vayidaber. Right? The next pasuk tells us, Vayidaber Moshe el Hashem lemor, that Moshe speaks to Hashem, saying to him. And what we need to understand is, and we'll focus on this next week, what is Moshe Rabbeinu saying to Hashem? This is coming from Moshe Rabbeinu. It's not coming from Hashem, it's coming from Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, realizing that he is not going to be the one leading them in, also understands that Bnei Yisrael cannot be leaderless. So he is asking Hashem here, and we'll see there are 4 instances where we have this expression, Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe lemor, Vayidaber Moshe el Hashem lemor, where Moshe Rabbeinu is asking Hashem a question and waiting for Hashem to answer him. This is one of them, and it regards the future leadership of the Jewish people. It'll be interesting when we look at the other 3 and see what they're all about. Okay, everybody, thank you very much. Have a great day. My apologies for the late start.